Hey folks, and we are back live on the Dev Twitch stream. My name is Nick Taylor. I'm a lead software engineer at Forum. Forum is the software that powers Dev.
I'm Christina Gorton. I'm a developer advocate at Forum, and today we have Stephanie Eckles, software developer at Microsoft, talking with us about CSS and front-end things and all the fun stuff. So Stephanie, tell us about yourself a little first, or a lot.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for
Yeah,
having
yeah.
me. Um, yeah, I've been a web developer in some capacity for almost 15 years at this point. Um, I started with Flash, so grown up a little bit with the web and its evolution from that point in our history. Um,
Awesome.
I've always been interested in kind of the creative aspects of the web. That's what kind of led me to jump from be interested in Flash and then make the jump into, well, I want to put it on the web. So how do I go about doing that? And yeah, so I actually have a degree. My degree's in advertising. So the majority part of my career so far had been spent in advertising and marketing as a developer. I was in an advertising agency for a couple years as an intern and then full time, and then at an in-house marketing agency for a locally large enterprise here in the
Okay.
Midwest, for 8 years total, 6 years in marketing, 2 years in product, where I was leading development of our multi-platform design system. So always
Okay.
front end, um, and just kind of in the past couple years, sort of have found myself in the kind of niche of CSS as a
Yeah.
particular focus. So
Yeah, let's
yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about that a little. So kind of we mentioned it when we were, rehearsing for this and stuff, but tell us kind of that transition the last couple of years, like really just starting to get even more into CSS and not just get into CSS, but teaching people CSS. So that's something that you do a lot of, and we'll drop links to all of her stuff in a little bit, but let's talk about that some.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah, so before the pandemic, by which I mean a few months before it hit the US in particular, where
Good
we were
old
still kind of
pandemic.
yeah, where we were still kind of collectively on edge, like, is this gonna be a worldwide thing or not? And anyway, I just had started to turn my attentions back towards blogging and things, which actually started on Dev. And so definitely big super shout out to that. um, and I was just kind of throwing out some different thoughts. I kind of wanted to blog. I should also say I the majority of my time in marketing, and basically a decade of my career was spent with WordPress.
Okay.
So of course I was familiar with that as a possible opportunity for a blogging platform. But I wanted to do it a little more casually than that, so I wasn't quite ready to manage my own thing again.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so, Dev was great to get started on. You can go check out my earlier posts and, they're just kinda just a little bit more random topics, related to front end. But
Yeah.
as part of doing the design systems work in particular, but a little bit too from my marketing, time, we had a really small team. Um, it just was clear when we tried to talk to other developers throughout the company and try to get them onboarded to the design system and even within the product team that I was on, um, it definitely was something where folks were maybe trying to do things with JavaScript or missing some
Okay.
things related to accessibility as well that could be handled so much more succinctly with CSS, but they just weren't
Mhm.
aware of it. And that's completely fair. We can't all be up to date on everything all the time.
Yeah.
So I decided, well, I'm really interested in this. I've learned a lot in building out the design system components, both in the actual engineering part of that, but like I said, also just communicating to other developers and trying to understand where they are in their own kind of journey with things. Um, so I started writing the articles that are now available on moderncss.dev.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
with the idea initially that I was kind of attacking problems that I had literally solved many times myself and now could be done just so much simpler. And definitely the goal with that series is to keep it very practical. So it's not about tricks. It's not about one-off solutions. It's about helping you build up your CSS toolbox and take away skills to whatever sort of solution you're approaching, even if it isn't exactly what's represented in the tutorial. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely education has kind of rolled out of that as a sort of bonus part of what I've been doing.
Yeah, and from that you've had a bunch of different opportunities. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I just linked it, so I don't think I am. But you've done like smashing magazine articles, right? And been able to do a lot of egghead stuff. I know you got to do a lot of
Yeah.
egghead stuff. So that's been kind of a cool thing that spun from you starting to blog, right? I
Yes.
believe it happened after that.
Yeah. In a kind of uncharacteristic for me personality for my personality, I sort of randomly responded to Joel Hooks, who runs Egghead. He just had a general question about like, how do I get up to date on CSS? And I'm like, hey, this is
Mhm.
exactly what I'm trying to do. I just
Yeah.
happened to see it in my feed. I wasn't following him previously. I did not know that he ran Egghead, and just replied with one of my articles. And he just kind of immediately was like, hey, were you interested in being an instructor? Which was very cool. So
Yeah.
you just never know how things are going to roll.
He's
But
good at
yeah,
that. That's how I ended up doing a few videos because I
nice.
responded to something with some CSS.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, that definitely was super encouraging and validating that maybe there was, a wider market even that could be reached with the new medium of video. So yeah, I enjoyed doing that. I haven't done it a whole lot lately just because I've been
Mhm.
involved with other things,
A few things.
taking my
Yeah.
time. But yeah, I enjoyed that aspect of education materials too.
Yeah, I can't remember if I saw your Dev 2 articles first or modern CSS Dev because I know you cross post them, but I definitely really enjoy the modern CSS Dev website. It's just really beautiful. I love the
Pretty, yeah.
layout and the way it looks. But it's like you said, they're really practical examples. It's not like sass this, sass that, and then like all kinds of like gotcha, not gotchas, but like tricks, like you said. It's really just like here's some markup, and this is how you can, do a card or whatever. And I think that's super important because I'm a recovering div soup person. So it's just a really great resource, and we talked about this briefly in the rehearsal, but like you've put out so many resources. Like I kind of jokingly said you kind of got a bit of the case of whoops, I did another side project kind of thing, because there's like honestly so many amazing things you put out there. Like Button Buddy is one of them I can think of, which is super cool website. It's fun and approachable for I think it's not just about choosing color contrast. I think there's other aspects to it as well. I haven't been to it in a while, but yeah, and you just have all kinds of things going on. A bunch of stuff with we talked like 11T, like just all like 11D rocks. There's like so many resources. It's honestly pretty astounding. So
Well, thanks. Yes, there's a lot out there. In fact, I have reached the time of year. Apparently, I kicked off most of my things in fall. So I keep
oh,
getting
okay,
like domain
it's
renewal
happened.
emails lately.
Yeah.
But I'm using all of them except for like two, which are ones that I've had for many years and I don't plan
Okay,
to do things with anymore. And I tried to put them on the
yeah,
marketplace, but that hasn't been successful. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Tros Code's just giving you a shout out there. I know you. I think is it tomorrow you're on his stream? Or
Yep.
yes.
You can
yeah,
drop
yeah.
a link if you want, Alex.
Yeah. Shamelessly plug, Trust. But yeah, he's just saying you're just amazing, have so many projects, prolific. So yeah, definitely agree with that. Um, so
Yeah, before we get go ahead, Nick.
no, it's good. It was just an awkward pause, and I completely forgot
Okay.
what I was gonna say.
I'd say before we get into, for everyone watching, we're going to be talking more specific CSS stuff in a moment, like grid and container queries, which Nick and I are very excited about because we both love the front end in CSS, but haven't really got to dive into container queries at all. So we are excited to learn about
Yeah,
that. But
same
I'm
here.
wondering a little bit more some of your background. So right now you're at Microsoft. Can you talk a little bit about what you do at Microsoft, or even like how you came to start working at Microsoft before you started doing whatever you're doing at Microsoft?
Yes. So I think there's a misconception that I'm maybe DevRel at Microsoft, which I'm not. I'm a software
Okay.
engineer. Everything I do on the side is truly on the side. But yeah, I'm just a front-end focused software engineer, working on one of the major product sites. So, but I that kind of came out of writing modern CSS too, and just kind of, having that avenue to share some skill set, and that's shared a
Nice.
skill
Yeah.
set that a certain team was looking for. So just, general encouragement to anybody, like share what you're learning. You literally have no idea where it's going to lead you.
Yeah.
Kind of opportunities. So, but yeah, so just front end focused work over there. Have a small team and doing some cool stuff. So otherwise, yeah, there's not too much else to say about that, really.
Okay. That's
Is it
perfectly fine.
yeah, is it a design team you're on? Is it, sorry, design system team, or is it uh front end dev in general on whatever
Yeah,
project you're
front
on?
end dev supporting one of
Okay.
the big sites there. Yep.
Okay. Shout out to
Cool. Then
Bing
let's
if you search there. I don't know.
then let's transition to more CSS stuff. All right. So Nick, this is the time when you can start asking all your questions that you wanted to ask
Yeah,
before
yeah,
we went
yeah.
live.
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. I couldn't hold them in, but uh, you're a big fan of teaching CSS Grid. I've definitely used CSS Grid. I would not say not master. I'm definitely no pro at it yet, but I've definitely seen just huge gains in using it over a lot of other things. So I thought for fun to kick things off, because it's something I've heard a lot of people ask is, 'cause we have Flexbox has been around for a while now. We have CSS Grid now, which I think it was even supported in IE 11 in some kind of flavor, but and there was all kinds of hacks to, anyways. But one of the things I hear a lot is like, when should I use Flexbox versus CSS Grid? Because they have a lot, there's a bunch of things that are similar, but they aren't obviously the same thing. So just wondering if you could maybe talk to that.
Yeah, a lot of folks like to say one-dimensional versus two-dimensional. I think that's too abstract. I don't think that actually makes sense to folks who are asking that question. Um, I like to approach it from how squishy do I need my content to be?
I like that.
Because,
Yeah.
I like
uh,
that.
and not to discredit the two-dimensional, that's a critical part, but I
Mhm.
actually usually use it mostly for one-dimensional stuff. So Flex is good for why I'm bringing up squishiness is
Mhm.
Flex is good
Yeah.
for when you want your content containers based on the intrinsic, so the size that's coming from the content itself,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So you can force it to be rigid. Of course, you know, part of the evolution of responsive design was Flexbox based grids.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so of course you can force it to be rigid and have, more defined widths and things. But it's not as ideal as grid when you want to provide structure. So maybe
Mhm.
slightly
Okay.
less squishiness, where you want to predefine from a parent level how the children should line up or how much space they can occupy. Um, that's another key difference is Flexbox. You're defining it on a child level, how, their exact individual behavior, and
Hmm.
grid, you're defining it at the parent level. So, one of my own misconceptions was that grid was only for page layout because that was mostly the demos that were
Yeah.
provided
Okay.
way back in 2015, 16, 17. By the way, it's been fully supported since 2017 across our evergreen browsers. Um, and so I stayed away from it for a couple years because of that reason. I just
Okay.
didn't quite understand it. The syntax seemed like I always had to count columns and rows, and that seemed so much less, well, flexible, right?
Mhm.
Hmm.
But these days I'm using it from page layout to all the way down to radios and checkbox components. So,
Okay.
and then frequently I'll use it together with Flexbox because there still is at the end of the day different behaviors that I want that work best if we just combine them, and there's no reason not to,
Yep.
right? It's not
That's
like
my
a
favorite way to use it. I like
Yeah.
combining them. I'm like, they're both useful, and
Yeah.
this works better for me with Flexbox or Grid and whatever, and I use them both together constantly.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, there's no such thing as tree shaking, right? You already have them available to you all the time. You don't have to import
Yeah.
them separately. So it's just
Exactly.
understanding your individual quirks in terms of when one might be the best solution over the other. And sometimes that's a gray line, and sometimes they work equally well. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing with both of them is I still have to look up properties sometimes. I mean, thanks to like IntelliSense and like your editor and even the browser tools. Like I forget when they shipped it, but there's like a little icon beside like Flex and Grid now where you can actually see the properties and you can kind of tweak it too. But like yeah, there's stuff I still look up, but you know I'm not too worried about it. But there I find some of the grid syntax a little obscure sometimes. Like there's one I forget what it is, but there's like it's a slash in between. I forget for which property you use that. I can't remember if it's for columns or rows, but a way to say you're doing something and then slash and then something else and
Like
but
1/4, like you want to go
yeah,
from
something like that. I
one
forget what
to
it's
four.
for though. It's probably for columns or rows, but
I think it's both.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
and see, I thought the
yeah,
same thing. Like I thought I had to write it that way.
hmm
okay,
And I absolutely see how that's the impression because again, I was there too. I almost never write code like that when I'm using Grid,
okay,
if it's any consolation.
okay,
So
good to
there's
know.
other ways to achieve what you're after, probably.
Yeah.
In
What are
most
the ways
cases.
you like to write Grid? Obviously, there's lots of ways, but what do you find most useful or something that you use often when writing CSS Grid?
Yeah, should I pull up a Codepen so we
Yeah,
can
Yeah,
go for
sure.
it.
demo a little bit? All right,
Always up for Codepen.
Yeah.
let me do that little switcheroo. Click all the buttons to get it shared.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Ben Holmes found a wild Steph on our stream, apparently.
Who would have thought,
Uh,
Ben?
Shout out to Slinkity Dev.
And here we have a very nice classic CodePen joke. If you can't read it, it says
Mhm.
if a groundhog inspects their web component, do they see their shadow DOM? Nice job,
Oh,
CodePen.
gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah,
Um,
so let's see. We'll just give ourselves a super basic structure, which I usually pick a list.
Mhm.
I'm just going to take advantage of emit to make it a little faster for us.
Sounds
okay.
good.
We'll give
Shout
this
out
an
to
odd number.
Emmett.io.
Yeah, emit just lets you kind of write things sort of CSS selector style, and you saw it just expanded it out. You can pre-populate with Lorem, which is really handy too
Yep.
for doing a quick
Yeah, yeah.
demo. Um, so I am just because I opened a completely fresh one here. I don't like to use any of the resets. I just
Mhm.
Okay.
don't need them. They're kind of in our way. So I'm just going to give us a small, and I think I turned off auto formatting too.
Yeah.
Box sizing, border box. That just, if you're unfamiliar, that helps. That means that padding and border will not be included in the computed size, which can cause overflow and some other issues. So since I removed the reset, I just needed to add that back in.
Mhm.
Um, so let's see, we know what let me make this the expanded one. Is that large enough text size? I can certainly move
Yeah, I
it.
You
think
could probably
so.
go up maybe one or two more times. There we go. That's
Yeah,
good.
that's
Yep.
perfect. Yeah.
Cool. So let's go ahead and reset since I do have it in a list. We'll just do a quick reset on its styles.
Mhm.
Cool. So we'll turn our list into the grid, if I can type today. And you'll see like one of the first differences, Nick, you're talking about alignment and things. And so
Yeah.
that's definitely one of the first features to take note of right off the bat with grid is that, it's been applied, but you didn't see if we toggle this on and off, you're
Hmm.
not going to see an actual difference in our DOM here. Because compared to Flex, its default orientation, they're technically both row orientation. I keep saying this wrong when I talk about it. They're technically
Yeah.
both row orientation, but it's just that Flexbox treats it in a way that it jumps all elements into the same row, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's partly why, we talk about it as being different dimensions going on here. So yeah, definitely our first standout thing, and one reason folks began to use Grid a little bit more is because we had better support for gap property. So you see
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
now popped in. It's our space between.
Okay,
This
it's
can
just
be
gap. I thought I thought you had to type grid gap. I'm always typing grid gap.
I think it changed at some
it
point,
did
didn't it?
Okay.
change.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so
Okay.
you will get a little better support. It's just one of those things to check support on. I think we are good with um, just gap. Pretty. There's Flexbox, which pretty great that that's on Flexbox now too. Yeah,
Oh
looks
yeah,
like
it's
we're
pretty
good.
solid.
Yeah, looks like the yellow low row up here, that's when we still had to kind of prefix
Mhm.
it
Okay.
grid gap. And gap itself is shorthand. So if we expand it here in DevTools, it is actually row gap and column gap at the same time. So
Yeah.
you can provide it multiple values, which, it's not going to affect what we're showing right now. Other than that, it shrunk it because the first one's for column.
Yeah.
Or for row. So, but yeah, so you can do that. Um, so one of the first things though, if we're, strictly talking about like comparing it to Flexbox, and if you do want that behavior, um, real quick, let's just on our LIs, I'm just going to give them an outline
Mhm.
and just a tiny bit of padding.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we can see those grid children just without using inspector. That's the reason I did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, And so, if we want it to behave a little bit more like Flex, what we can do is we can change grid auto flow. And I said it was row as a default, so we're going to change it to column. And now they've jumped up next to each other, and
Okay.
they are actually, when they have enough space, they're going to be relative to their kind of intrinsic size. So more that behavior, which you can kind of see with these
Okay.
first ones, they're just a little bit
Mhm.
shorter. So if I let's change the width of these a little more drastically. There we go.
Yep.
So it's using the
Okay.
intrinsic size because I
Yeah.
haven't used grid to be more explicit. So you can get this behavior. What you lose compared to, let's go ahead and make this more explicit just so we can do a really quick comparison for Flex.
Mhm.
We'll just duplicate that, call it Flex. So, let me add back in
Oh yeah.
gap. So we still have gap, but you'll see a little bit different behavior in terms of how that space has been allocated to
Mm.
those elements, right? So grid is going to expand the whole space. It's ultimately going to let those elements grow. So hopefully this helps demonstrate a little bit like that idea of squishiness, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Eventually, they line up when I get it all the way, reduced down to where that's
Mhm.
just kind of how they're forced to be because of their base. Um, But yeah, so that's like one little trick. This took me forever to find because I
Yeah.
could not figure out the right term to use for
Yeah.
what
Yeah. I
I
didn't know
wanted.
that existed.
So that's kind of here. Let's give
I
us a
feel like
little.
I only knew it existed because of like VS Code or maybe it was in
Oh
Codepen when you
yeah. Yeah.
start
Just
like
popping
typing, it
up.
would
Yeah.
always like come up and I'm like, what is that? And just playing around
Yeah,
with it. Like,
exactly, which is completely fair.
yeah.
I do a lot of like, I'll give myself a demo like this, just like this bare essential markup. And then
Mhm.
Yeah.
I will do that myself. I will come in here and I will just kind of see, yeah, what comes up.
Yeah.
I do that especially when I do have to do some
Oh, yeah.
alignment. I'm like, what am I trying to find?
Yeah.
So again, don't think you have to know all the properties and perfectly know what they do all the time, for sure. Um, but yeah, so if we want to do, so here's where, when we talk about it being two-dimensional, um, a quick upgrade, or actually, let me leave my Flex one in here for a second. So with Flex, we also have the option to, turn on Flexwrap.
Mhm.
If
Yeah.
if you know the bare essentials of Flexbox, this is probably what you're used to applying to a
Yeah.
lot of places. So we can see, of course, those wrapping as soon as they kind of hit the point of, maxing out their content, basically. Then it just kind of intrinsically wraps around. And that's really, really nice. That's still a behavior that we can't completely mimic in Grid if you want your elements based on the children's intrinsic width. So I will
Hmm.
always continue to use Flexbox for example, navigation,
Mhm.
links that I want to just wrap based on themselves and not be
Yeah.
aligned to a more strict grid as we see on this one. So we can, I'm just going to display none this one so I don't have to remove it.
Yeah.
We can mimic that kind of behavior um, to an extent with grid. So we can do grid template columns, and this is my favorite trick. We have a lot of, another unique thing about grid is we have a lot of grid specific functions. And those are
Mhm.
all pretty much intended to help you control the size of the children elements and, help produce this grid structure more efficiently. Um, so one of those is this repeat function. We can do it really simply. We'll say repeat 3 times. In other words, 3 columns is what we're going to allow in this grid. And we'll use one FR. And that's going to, this is a fractional unit. It's going to allot um, each of these elements an equal amount of the shared space, enough to produce 3 columns worth, right? I have no other
Mhm.
constraints on this particular grid. So they're always going to remain 3 columns.
Yeah.
You can see that I'm starting to get overflow though, because again, we don't by default have a wrap property that I can just throw on this like we have with
Yeah.
Flex. It would kind of defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do, right? So I can understand why that's not readily available. But we can mimic that behavior by switching our um, strategy here. We're going to use auto fit as a keyword rather than explicitly defining how many columns to use.
Mhm.
And instead of one FR by itself, we're going to use another grid specific function called min max. And so we're going to provide it what is the minimum value that it can be allowed and what is the maximum. And so the minimum is where we essentially are choosing at which point do we want our orientation to start switching. And so we're going to, I usually like to base this on number of characters or roughly the number of characters. It isn't exact, but this
Mhm.
CH unit is equal to the width of the 0 character in whatever font at that time and font size. And
Yeah.
then we'll still allow it to grow and share a proportion of that equal space. So on, right now it looks exactly like what I had before, but
Mhm.
as I start shrinking down, once we hit a point where the elements that share a row would have to be squished smaller than that 25ch, then it
Mhm.
breaks into a new virtual row. And then
Mhm.
it just expands based on that one FR. It expands to still fill the space and produce however many columns it still can. And so
Okay.
ultimately, we get down to what we might call a mobile layout.
Yeah. No, that's pretty nice.
Yeah. So we can get close. But the difference here, if I bring back my flex grid, is that whereas with Flex, when it starts to wrap and everything, I can use, um, our different justify and align, like I can make that centered, right?
Mhm.
I
Hmm.
have this property available to me on grid, but it's not going to do it. It's going
Mhm.
Okay.
to maintain that rigid grid structure. Um, I'm just going to change the color here so we can make sure we see the difference between the two.
Okay.
So, again, it's really about what's the level of squishiness. and choosing the right tool for the behavior you're after. I frequently find that this grid behavior is great. Like you brought up, my modern CSS.dev. That's what I'm using for the cards. Makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense. Most of the time, I want those to be pretty rigid. I don't want them to be respond to their intrinsic widths, or would be hard to scan, and if you
Yeah.
lose that consistency. Um, whereas this already starts to look like a nav or something similar.
Yeah.
Um, and we won't probably go completely into it, but we can make Flex, of course, mimic more of this type of behavior. It just takes a lot more management, right? We did it with Grid with one line of code.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, and it's not about being clever, right? It's just about helping to understand what tools we have available to pick that best fit solution.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Um, I had a question. There's grid areas in CSS Grid, and in Flexbox, for example, there's the flex direction. Like you can reverse it. And curious from like an accessibility standpoint, I know I've read before about the direction in Flex. It's not really good to dictate what you're laying out if you reverse it, and that's how you want to present it to sighted users, because from an accessibility standpoint, it gets things all kind of messed up for people using assistive technologies. I'm curious if it's kind of the same thing with the grid areas, because like I've seen like one of my friends recently was just making a tic-tac-toe with CSS Grid, and to kind of associate things, they were changing the grid areas so that like pieces could move.
Mhm.
And I'm guessing, but I'm just curious on your thoughts. I imagine it's kind of like the same kind of accessibility issue when you're doing stuff like that with a grid area, or does it not apply? Or
It The main question there is, do those grid areas contain interactive elements? So what we're worried
okay,
about when we're talking about changing visual order versus the natural DOM order is if you have links or buttons
hmm,
or form elements, somebody who is sighted and relies on using their keyboard or similar input method, not a mouse, um,
yeah,
they rely on that visual focus. And so if you are changing that visual focus, um, because you're placing things in an order that is different than DOM order, that means their visual
yeah,
focus, they can
that's all over
lose
the
that
map.
tracking.
Yeah,
Hmm.
okay, okay,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
yeah, if
So I
there's
know,
nothing
yeah,
interactive, it's not, it can still be detrimental,
yeah,
because if it's a screen reader user that is uses screen readers for reasons other than vision loss, they still have a visual tracker,
yeah,
that they can follow blocks of text and different things around the screen.
Hmm.
So it's not about visual
yeah,
order, but it's still, you're still manipulating the DOM order that's going to
yeah.
track.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I thought it was something similar to like the row direction in Flex, but just wanted to check in because
Yeah.
yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. And speaking of grid areas, is that something you use a lot or not so much? Because like I definitely see use cases for it, but I'm curious about your experience with it because I know you've worked a lot with grid. So
Yeah. That's kind of my third trick I like to show,
okay,
that we definitely cannot do in Flex. So I'm just going to completely take out our Flex right now.
Grid areas.
Um,
I use them.
so I actually, what I usually, so again, I like to approach things from a practical standpoint. Grid area, what we can do, what I teach in my workshop, just because it helps
mhm,
connect dots, is how to use grid areas to truly do a whole page layout. And that's great.
okay,
I actually don't really ever use that. Because for a page layout basis, what happens is, if, again, I come from marketing background, so this is real, right? Somebody's going to ask for something else to be added to the page. And if it's something that falls outside of your landmarks that you're using in your grid layout, now your grid layout is broken. And
okay,
somebody's
okay,
gonna have to trouble with
gotcha.
that.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
no.
it really depends though. Um,
Okay.
So instead, if I'm using grid areas, I'm usually using them for components. So by that I mean, just parts of the page, very
Okay.
contained parts of the page. Um, and one of my absolute favorite things about that is that grid allows you to very easily stack elements on top of each other. Um, whether that's by assigning them to the same grid row and column. If you do have a more complex grid, really do some cool art design stuff. You can go look at like Jen Simmons and Rachel Andrew, their different demos. But on a kind of lower level, I use it a lot for things like page headers where I want a background image and
Okay.
then some text over it. And by using this single grid area, we can achieve that. And what's nice about that is we can keep the semantics of the image.
Mm-hmm.
So actually have an inline image rather than background image, but still get the effect of, what you might have instead chosen to do, which would be a background image and then some method of centering your text within that.
Okay.
Um, so we can do, so the way to define that is we do grid. So I'm on my parent grid class here. Grid template areas, and I'm just going to give it one. And it doesn't, we can name it, which is really nice. And it doesn't matter what this name is. It doesn't have to be unique in your style sheet. It is local to that, context. So I just usually call it
Okay.
stack. Um, and then what we do is we say that all of the children within that element, because you can see there was no change yet, they all belong to that same grid area of stack. And we've kind of created a mess just because we don't have a background color or anything
Okay.
on
Yeah.
these.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but um, based on DOM order, they've truly stacked on top of each other. And there's no other like positioning information for our grid right now.
Okay.
Um, so just really quickly, we can give it an aspect ratio just to force some extra space here.
Okay.
And then here's your most modern way to center things. We're going to say place content center, and it's turn everything to the center of this element. We'll give ourselves a outline on our container too. Actually, I'll bump that up to see it just a little bit easier.
Okay.
Um, and what's cool is then at this point, we can use grid positioning rather than our older solution of absolute positioning to rearrange our
Okay.
elements within the grid. So just for example, we can select, I'll just choose the second one randomly here. We're going to use, there's a lot of different ones we can use. We can basically choose to place it, maybe. Oh, I think actually just did this last week. There we go. Sorry, chose
Okay.
the wrong place for my initial grid, but so I can throw this basically in any corners or any sides. And then if I want to, still adjust this positioning, we can kind of fall back on margin to, pull it out of the corner or whatever. But those
Okay.
are always going to stay relative,
Mm-hmm.
to this element, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so if I'm using grid template areas, I'm bringing it down to a small scale. Or I'm having just like, so like on my checkbox and radio solution, we define just two template columns. So we just have one for the input and one for the label.
Okay.
So it still allows us to kind of control that space because we do want that to be a very structured environment. Um, and so we get the benefit of having the structure from grid. And then within the input grid area, it's own child nested grid area to properly place, right? So again, it's not just about these big component areas or page layout areas, but you can bring it as small as you need to. I really appreciate the grid positioning and the ability to layer things
Yeah. Yeah.
up. It makes sense in a lot of contexts. And again, we used to have to do absolute positioning, which was basically just a hack because that was the tool we had at the time. So, okay, once you kind of start learning more about these capabilities, you probably can start to see like where solutions you felt in the past could
Yeah.
be simplified.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the other thing too is if you were using absolute positioning there, like maybe this is a component, then you need to set position relative on the container. Like there's just a lot more work to do what you just did in like a couple lines, basically. So yeah, it's really
Yeah.
elegant, and
Yeah, our key
it's kind
lines
of
were the grid template areas, assigning everything to the same one, and then from there, just kind of choosing how to handle those children individually.
Yeah.
Which this is like
yeah,
way more elements than you would probably have, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
No,
You're doing some of the artsy things.
it's making me think of like you could make a funny component like the recycling bin on like Windows where everything's in the same stack and it's just in the garbage can and then you pull out stuff. But anyways, side note.
Another
No,
side
that's
note.
very cool.
Honestly, Nick, I think you and I should be sponsored by Chris. If no one knows what Chris software is, it like takes
Oh
away
yeah, yeah,
background
yeah, yeah.
noises. Because my kids, the whole time Stephanie has been talking, my youngest has been in the background making like zombie noises. And no one heard it.
Yeah,
Nice.
no, hey, yeah, we should get sponsored. It is pretty awesome because like most of the time when my kids are at school, but I have like a air filter going on and stuff, and like and I'm sure when you stream, like I don't know if you have an M1. I don't have an M1, but my MacBook, even though it's a souped up 2019, like the fans on it when as soon as you start streaming like OBS, you open Chrome or like a browser or VS Code, it's like the space shuttle's taken off. So the crisp
Yeah, I'm
software
the same
actually
over here
blocks
right
all of it.
now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I
Yeah.
probably won't need to heat my house this winter. So yeah. Um I did have oh hey Cassidy. Cassidy Williams is just popping in and say hi. Yeah, I hear that Chris Coyer guy's not too bad at that Codepen stuff. Um
Hmm. I
I
think
did
we
have a
talked to him
question.
once on here.
Yeah, yeah. I had a question because I've heard about SubGrid and I don't think it's in browsers yet, but I don't understand the use case for it yet because I just haven't seen it in action. So I'm curious, what's a good use case for SubGrid versus just having a grid in a grid? Uh, I guess that's my question basically.
Yeah. So I have not played with it yet. So I definitely point folks to last month, uh, a phenomenal CSS educator, Kevin Powell, did a whole month where he was advocating for SubGrid and lots of
Mm,
Okay.
streams and YouTube videos. So I haven't played with it personally. I was watching
yeah.
some of their materials because I hadn't got to play with it yet. Uh, the one that comes to mind for me, and the one that I know Rachel Andrew actually in her some of her early materials on it demonstrated is
Yeah.
if I go out to here. So just
There's a
the
beautiful site.
quickest
I love
example
this
of a
site.
bunch of cards. Okay, let me get down. So like this row right here. So if I had subgrid in place, what I could do, and again, my marketing background, I've literally had to deal with this request many times,
Okay.
is, you know, for some folks, our designer friends, the idea that this description text is different
Mm-hmm.
locations horizontally across the screen, that's something
Okay.
we could fix with subgrid because could essentially define with our subgrid, it would place each of these titles in the same grid row. And so they
Okay.
would snap to essentially, it would snap to the height of this one because it happens to be the tallest. And so that
Oh,
would give
okay.
us that effect of our descriptions visually aligning. You know,
Ah, okay,
that's
okay.
like a
That
low
makes
level
sense.
example, but also a super common one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but also, in terms of whole page layout, so folks who are also familiar with getting requirements to design against a 12 column grid or what have you, instead of having to define that individually on every container that you add to the page, you would have it defined once and then those sub containers would pick up that
Okay.
grid. So I could actually define this grid that I have here on a page level. And so, for example, I could have, if it was a 12 column or whatever I had it be, I could have like my logo and things. I could tell it to be in those middle two columns, and it would, then I would have alignment, for
Hmm.
example,
Okay.
like between these two cards. So instead of having to redefine that because your math changes right now. As your element sizes change, we have to work around that in terms of having consistency for various points of alignment. And it's not that difficult to work around, right? Usually we say that our containers, just as I have here, have some sort of max width,
Yeah.
some method for max width. And then we just do, continually apply a grid or use other methods. Um, I'm very interested to see, um, support for that coming and get my hands on to play a little bit more. But yeah, definitely check out. Thank you for linking to Kevin there,
Yep.
if you are more interested. But it is only in Firefox. However,
Yeah.
just last week, I think the bug on it for Chromium, one of the Microsoft Edge engineers picked it up and is going to start working on it. So there is
Ah, cool.
recent movement, which is good. Um, I don't see Thomas in the chat, but they're a person I know that has been following it since like the very beginning, like waiting for this to
Okay. Okay.
land.
Yeah.
I think it's like 2015 or something. It's been the bug was
Okay. It's
made.
been around that long. I know people have been
The
talking
the
about container
idea of it,
queries for a
yeah,
long time,
Idea.
but
Yeah.
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
People were like talking about SubGrid as Grid was coming. They're just
yeah,
like, "We're SubGrid." Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
something
You
at
don't
a
even have grid yet, and you're asking for subgrid.
yeah,
Oh man.
time. Well,
Yeah.
Stephanie, we told you we weren't going to put you on the spot, and we're not. So we do want to talk about container queries. You do not have to live code anything about container queries if you do not want to, like you just did for us with uh, CSS Grid. If you want to just talk examples, that's fine. If you want to show us stuff on Codepen, that's awesome too. But I think we do want to talk about that as well. And like we
Yeah.
had told you before, we will not make you live code to us if you do not want to.
not a problem. Yeah, so container queries is something that is also on the way. Um, It is, so I personally on my machine right here, I am using Chrome Canary, and that is the only browser, specifically Canary, that it is available in. So the quick summary of what are container queries. Um, Container queries allow you to um, consider the width of an individual element on the page versus what we're used to for responsive design, considering the entire viewport to try to orchestrate layout changes that you want to happen.
Okay.
So I need to update this article very desperately. I'll put it in chat because the syntax is changing because again, it's only in Canary right now. But I'll show you real quick if you're interested in playing with this. You want to download Chrome Canary, and then you need to go to this Chrome flags location. And I already have it enabled, but if you don't have it enabled, you can just search for container. It's going to help you find it,
Okay.
and you just want to turn it on. You'll have to restart your browser. And then don't forget that it's on. An interesting thing is when you do have certain experiments on, sometimes that can make other behavior a little weird that you don't expect to be weird.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
So just something to remember if you're doing other testing and things in Canary as well. But you can always disable it. Um, and so let's see. So my demos here are a little outdated, but let me go down to just the visual. So in this article, I was kind of approaching, how would we actually change some layout on Smashing Magazine,
Yeah.
specific to their article. So they had these kind of three different layouts that, of course, are viewport driven right now.
Yeah.
And the idea was, well, instead of doing that, because there's times where, they have the mobile view, they have a view where it's on an individual, like an archive page
Okay.
or an author's page, I mean, and then an archive page. And so based on how much width it has, you can see these like different meta elements, the author name, those get rearranged. And it was a great candidate for how could we do this as a container query instead? So in other words, what they're able to do or what container queries would allow is instead of doing that from a viewport media query based way, we can sort of build it in to this inherent article component. And then
Okay.
wherever it's dropped in, no matter how much room it has, it will just smartly rearrange itself to fit these
That's
different
awesome.
contexts. So that's what this article is an exploration of. So, we don't have to touch the DOM at all. It
Mhm.
also uses grid to do that
Okay.
rearrangement. So again,
Oh,
how we're talking about, we want the structure, and it actually ends up using, you can see grid template areas to be able to manipulate all that. So this article accidentally teaches you a lot about grid.
yeah.
Um, but ultimately, we get the three different solutions here. Um,
Okay.
okay, I can do this video really quickly. It just
Mhm.
shows you just this is being done again, not by media queries, but just simply the width that the
Okay.
article has at a given time.
And
And I had
a
to show
quick
you the video
question.
because I think this one's
Oh,
broken.
yes. Oh, okay. And a quick question about this. Is this meant to complement media queries or is it meant to replace them? Because it's container, so it's on a specific element, but like yeah, just kind of curious.
Yeah, great question. And maybe it is working. I thought that the syntax needed update, but it looks like this one is working. Um,
Okay.
so again, it depends what you're after. Viewport queries, media queries still make sense for entire page layout because what happens, so if we break it down, like what's required for a container query to work. So this is the slightly older syntax, but in fact, I'll update it really quick just to show you. It was really expansive. Now all it
Mhm.
needs to
Okay.
be is this, I believe. Yes.
Okay.
So in order for a container query to work, we have to use this container property to define which elements are allocated as containers.
Okay.
So when you create a container to query,
Yeah.
um, what it means, if I go down to the actual query part here, is that it is going to allow you to modify its children. You actually can't modify the container itself unless
Okay.
that container has an ancestor that it has containment on it,
Okay.
which can be a little bit of a gotcha. Um, and so in this respect, it's a lot like, a viewport media query because you're just changing your context, right? Now we're looking at the article specifically and not the entire viewport. So, this is the exact same element here, and it's just changing based on its width,
Okay.
um, which is nice. So, at that point, you have access to everything. A cool thing about containers too is that it's kind of helped promote along. Um, it's not in Canary yet. I checked really quick before we went live. But it's started to promote a little bit different syntax that we're going to have here, where you can
Okay.
actually use like a greater than and less than sign. And
Oh, nice.
eventually, you can maybe query for values of custom properties. So, uh, does that property kind of exist, or is it currently making the background blue? So, not
Mhm.
necessarily about width. So that's a huge, of course, difference from just our media queries. So going to
Yeah.
open up a ton of new capabilities. But, on a standard, again, practical sense, just being able
Yeah.
to kind of rearrange things based on their width and not have to um so like in a design systems world, you'd be able to ship all these container rules with your component and it would
Yeah.
truly become in some cases, there's caveats, but in some cases,
Yeah.
kind of a, write once, deploy anywhere sort of a deal. Because you wouldn't have
Yeah.
to worry about whatever else is going on the page. You're just giving the structure, you're giving these container styles, and then once it has content, whether it gets dropped in a sidebar or a whole entire page, it's gonna be able to accommodate those contexts. So that's the
Yeah. No,
power that we're gonna have.
yeah, I was gonna say it definitely fits well with a component model, regardless of what you're using.
Yeah.
If it's plain HTML, React, Svelte, Vue, whatever. Uh, and and like you said, like if this is in the design system, the people who are, or I don't want to say just developers, but people that like who are maybe more back end of the front end, as I
Yes.
forget Brad Frost says, like they don't have to worry about so much aside from like, okay, drop it in, code that up, and then it's good to go. So I think that's super powerful. And in regards to the, saying it doesn't replace media queries, you were talking previously, like a few minutes ago, about at container being, within another at container. So I guess I'm gonna generalize here, but from what you're saying, it seems like a best practice is typically to have only one at container and then just manage all the children from that element that has an at container rule on it. Is that
Great question. So that was an early gotcha.
Mhm.
okay?
And now it's been a bit, we have a little upgrade. So we can now, uh, this actually, let me double check this because I did not change this yet. So containers to shorthand, we can extend this to be explicitly container type, and then I can actually also add a container name. And
Mhm.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Let's see over here in the spec. I'm not sure if it has to be quoted. No, it does not have to be
Okay.
quoted. Um, so article or whatever. So
Okay.
if we're using an explicit name, then I could change my at container to include the name. So
Oh,
that's how
okay.
you can get around. Yes, because
Okay.
I also saw that as a potential pitfall. Um, and thinking of design systems, I think even with the names in place, to help kind of scope that down and make sure that we're only affecting that just in case. In
Hmm.
this instance, I just reused what Smashing already had for their um, class names and things, right? So they're kind of BIM styled and pretty scoped already. Um, but yeah, if you had something a little more generic, you might want to scope it down a bit more
Okay.
by throwing the name. I can also see folks wanting to just, in general, provide some sort of opt-in method, maybe an extra class. So it's not just generically applied to all my articles, but maybe
Okay.
I opt in, you know,
Yeah.
or something like that. So um, a few different ways. It's going to be, exciting. We're going to kind of all be playing with it and helping to create these best practices as it
Yeah.
becomes more available. So I think that'll be a fun part of it. But yeah, it'll
Yeah. Yeah.
take a
No, for
while.
sure. Yeah, like
Oh,
anything new, but it's super
Yeah.
cool. At least from what I've seen in this demo you just gave us, it's yeah. And I
Yeah,
guess
I think that would be fun.
we don't have to live code it. We're not going to do live code this, but like I'm assuming like if we said like let's do this with media queries, it's like a bit more a can of worms than what we currently have here with the container queries.
Yeah, it's kind of it's just a flip of how you're going to think about it, right? So
mhm.
one thing that the CSS working group did resolve is that if an element is trying to do a container query and it has no container, it's basically going to roll back up to the body. So it's essentially going to then be treated
Okay.
as a viewport query, if that makes sense, right? Which would
Yeah.
have unexpected results, but at least you're not completely losing maybe some intention there. Um, and so I cleared this out. So I just off to the side. I have another one that I can just mimic real quick so we can walk through the steps really quick. So if I have another kind of gotcha is that if we were to use Grid or Flexbox to align things, we
Mm-hmm.
can't actually use. You cannot provide containment on the. So if I have, let me pop this in so I can talk about it better.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You cannot, if I make this UL a grid container or a flex container, um, I cannot watch the width of the list element. So if it's a grid item or a flex item, I have to
Okay.
provide an additional nested container to explicitly watch because
Mhm.
otherwise I'm watching the width of my entire grid. And what I
Okay.
really want to watch is the width of a grid item or a flex item. So in some instances, that would be the main one that comes to mind. Your elements need to carry their container with them. So if we roll with this example, I leave this in here. Um, so we're going to set up then our the list items themselves as containers. And
Okay.
Okay.
then keep clicking the wrong one.
Mhm.
And then hold on, we gotta style up our Let me bring in my demo styles that were over here.
I gotta get demo styles. I don't have any demo styles. I'm just always just typing it fresh.
So what I've just popped in here, I've just given myself some colors here to play with. We've created our list element as a flex grid. It's allowed wrap, and just gave it a max width basically. So we've only got flex behavior happening right now.
Yep.
And this demo, what's happening is we're going to end up changing the color of the elements and also the content here just to help us like know when we hit a breakpoint. Right.
Okay.
So we kind of explored this behavior kind of sort of at the beginning of the stream. We were doing it with grid. But same idea. I chose flex for this because we have that behavior that will allow it to expand out, whereas we were, kind of talking that was a potential downside of doing a grid
Yeah.
grid.
Yeah.
Huh. So in this case, it helps us kind of explore, that size of our container.
Okay.
So, like I said, if we put this on the grid, or excuse me, the list element that is a grid parent, now we're watching the edge to edge width, and instead we want to watch the individual element width. So we've had to
Okay.
add an
Gotcha.
extra child then because we can only style the child because it's watching the parent. The nearest ancestor that has containment would actually be the phrase to learn today in regards to container queries. So what we can do then is, just kind of, we haven't given it a name. That's totally fine. So we're just going to use the @container syntax versus @media. And if you miss me say it, this is only available in Chrome Canary. So that's the only reason this is working at all. But then from there, at this time, again, these are getting enhanced. We're going to get some new capabilities, but at this time, we can basically use a familiar syntax of what you might do for a media query. So I'm gonna. So far, my mental model has been to treat container queries similar to how you might be used to thinking of things mobile first. So in other words, the default is our smallest represented size, and then we're gonna modify it as it has more room to grow. By the way, we've been talking about width this whole time. So that's why this says inline size. They are working on having it available for height. It just typically is a less common scenario because usually you want that height to be allowed to grow. And in order for it to work, it'd have to be a little bit more explicitly, extrinsically defined. So defined by an additional parent. Anyway, so it's a little more complicated. But this is also more familiar of thinking of it as width in terms of our viewport queries and things. So I'm just going to copy in my style here to prevent typing this part because it's not as important. But so if you can see that last one changed, so that means it's above this threshold of this 45 ch. So we changed the content and the color. And I don't think so there's a certain point at which they're all medium.
Okay.
So you can quickly kind of see how that adjusts. And then eventually we're all small. And so we can do one more breakpoint here and basically define a large container query. I'm still kind of calling it breakpoints. I don't know if we'll decide that that's still the appropriate term or if that's confusing with viewports, media queries. So I just popped one in. It's going to be at 70 and it's going to be large. There we go. We triggered it there. Okay. Then when it grows even more, now we're back to medium. So just a really quick little demo on being able to quickly track how that works across our different sizes.
No, it's super helpful with the small, medium, large as you transition in terms of teaching. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and so that's all, just one property here. If we wanted to make our list another grid element, maybe we then choose to give it a name. So then perhaps maybe when our entire list was, all below the 45, so maybe we decided that's our mobile viewpoint, maybe we do something a little bit differently. at that point related to the list items. So
Mhm.
Okay.
if this was because if our grid was a container, then we could modify the list items themselves, maybe add a little
Hmm.
bit more padding, or if we weren't relying on gap, or who knows, whatever would make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, you definitely can layer them up, but it just takes a little more coordination.
Yeah. And in terms of container queries, we've seen the container type and the at container. Is is there anything else to it? And I'm not saying that because I'm disappointed. It's more I'm curious.
Yeah. So I would definitely, let me just throw this in the chat. This is the
Mhm.
editor's draft. So
Okay.
this is getting updated. And I know Chromium folks behind Chrome Canary are working as quick as they can, to support any changes that land in the draft here. So,
Hmm.
like I said, that's why my article's out of date because I haven't updated it to reflect these changes of you know, adding in this explicit container value. But yeah, you can get a pretty good, let's see. Let's see. I'm wondering. Here we go. The at container rule. So I know specs are a little difficult to grok if you're not used to looking at them.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's usually some examples. So you can see here, like this syntax isn't quite supported, but you can see what they're thinking about and what
Mm.
might be coming.
Okay.
Um, and
And
so
that
there's
was
there's a
a
few examples
CSS
here.
variable up there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that was one thing. Ben Holmes mentioned that in the chat. One
Yeah.
advantage with the container queries is you can use CSS variables, but you can't with media queries. So that's
Yeah.
definitely one thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's key to keep in mind this is going to continue evolving um for a decent amount of time. The other place to track it is usually I have, here we go. CSS Working Group actually posts all of their, in progress work as issues on GitHub. So this is actually the project.
Okay.
Um, I think I guess this isn't the project, this is issues, but related to the CSS containment 3. So that is everything to do with container queries.
Mhm.
And you can see what they're actually talking about and go in and vote on different features. Or if you don't see a feature represented you think should exist, you can actually add an issue. So you can
I see
completely
terrible
get
Leah
involved.
there.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool to be able to see that progress. And again, so they're gonna resolve something and there'll be a delay between when it, is in Canary and things like that. But yeah, pretty
Yeah.
exciting. Lots of work to be done is the other thing to just kind of make clear as you're
Yeah.
looking through this before it's really ready.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like seriously, like big shout out to anybody that works at the W3C because this, like as a consumer of these things, you're like, okay, yeah, I can use this now, but like there's a I mean just writing a spec for anything is a lot of work. So like and the web is moving so fast these days, it's just yeah, big hat tip to everybody at the W3C. So or folks
Yep.
contributing to it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, Miriam Suzanne's the main initial spec writer on this, or primary spec writer on this. And but of course, lots of contributors you'll see in here, especially in terms of thinking through the issues. And it's
Yeah.
pretty cool when you actually um, open one of these up. If they've talked about it, it will have their like transcript from their
Oh, okay.
meeting on what they discussed
Okay.
about it, which is pretty cool. So you can super deep
Nice.
dive on whatever you're interested in that they're working on. And like I said, you can thumbs up them, use the GitHub reactions and
Yeah.
as you saw, so there's 19 projects sitting in here. I know the other one she's also working with is scope, and also layers. And then another one folks have been excited about, because the aspect ratio is still a little bit in progress, is, let's see, I thought it was in here, colors somewhere. Maybe it doesn't have a project, but
Okay.
that's another huge area that's in progress right now is lots of color related
The
functions and
the
things.
the scope one you were mentioning, is that in terms of scope to CSS, or is that
Yeah,
something else?
so it will
Okay.
be another at role will be at scope.
Mm.
And um I'm not completely versed on that one yet. It is starting to get movement, but I don't think it's experimental yet.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
could have missed
I
it.
think
Definitely could have missed it.
yeah. I think
I
I
think layers
was
is also maybe in an experimental status, but I haven't got to play with it either. Let's see.
okay.
Sorry, I
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
clicking on the wrong tab. Over here.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a few other interesting things like nested CSS, kind of like taking from Sass. I think I heard about that
Mhm.
Yeah.
on the Syntax FM podcast. They were talking about it. So it seems like there's a lot of stuff from userland as well, just coming into the actual specs, which is nice to see too.
Yep.
Because clearly, Sass exists for a reason, and a lot of people
Yeah.
use it still. So it's no, it's just cool seeing all this stuff. And honestly, it's being a web dev right now. I feel like it's such a awesome period in time to be one right now. Like, not definitely not trying to downplay anything from years ago, but it's just like things are moving so much more faster now. We got so much cool tooling. Like even the browser dev tooling is like, I feel like it's not changing all the
Mm.
time, but like there's just so many more things popping in there, as well. So it's just really feels like I don't want to sound cheesy, but a great time to be alive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great time to be getting started in web dev.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I think it probably feels overwhelming, of course, too. Whoops,
yeah,
didn't mean to
that
click
too.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, the tools, everything. I was just gonna double check here. I think they may have updated to add a little container. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they did.
So
Mhm.
starting to have
Nice.
a container little blurb too. So we can see our grid
Yeah,
and our container, how those are kind of
yeah,
working. So even just to have it called out, of course, will be super useful as we begin
Yeah.
working with them. But yeah, to your
yeah,
point, yeah, these even just to be able to help visualize different things. And like I said, I come in here all the time to remind myself like what order of properties or what
Yeah,
yeah,
there was
properties are
one
even
just a
available.
little bit ago when you were doing it, I think you were just trying to show real quick, like justify content or something, but it like
Yeah.
quickly showed like on the side what they would like look like, which one
hmm
like
Yeah.
it would
They've
look like,
added like
which,
this
yeah,
little buddy
just
to
so
help you
nice.
out.
yeah, yeah. No,
So you're not
that's
always like,
the
hold on, let me type the one. Hold on, let me go type the other one to make
Yes.
sure.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's super cool because it's interactive, so you can change it on the fly just by clicking on them, and
Yeah.
yeah. And I know you said this is only container queries are only available in Chrome Canary right now. Do you know if that, because like the new Edge is Chromium based? Do you know if their Canary supports that too, or no idea? Just out of curiosity.
Not to
I
my
I've been
knowledge.
using Edge lately, so
Yeah. Yeah, not to my knowledge. I think that just has to do with different devs,
yeah,
ultimately
okay,
behind the browser that comes in. But yeah, I mean, the advantage of that is yes, once it's actually in Chromium
yeah, it'll be in.
stable, it would be available to both. Yeah, pretty quickly anyway.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
Um, no, this is all like awesome, and thanks so much for doing those demos. I know you were saying you were a little rusty with container queries, but honestly, you didn't look that rusty to me. So
Thanks.
yeah, no, cool, cool. Um, we're we're getting a bit close to time here, but I know
Mhm.
like we were talking at the beginning there about like you've put out so many amazing side projects, and I kind of just wanted to, if you're cool with it, if we could look at a few of them right now, because like button buddy, like color contrast is something that comes up all the time, and like like I definitely use stuff like the WebAIM color contrast checker and stuff, but button buddy kind of kind of ups the game. And these are all, just to be clear, these are all amazing resources that Steph's put out, that are freely available, so
Mhm.
Mhm.
just calling that out too. So
Fun
but yeah,
ones too,
maybe
like
maybe
style
talk to,
stage. So we could talk about those
yeah.
as well.
Well, yeah, Style Stage Dev too. I like Button Buddy because of the facial expressions too. So it's um So
I'll
I
chew
don't know if
this
you maybe
one.
want to just kind of talk about it, what Button Buddy is because typically on the stream we have people from all different levels of experience. So some people might be
Yeah.
starting their dev journey. So
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my side projects are stuff that helps me as much as anything, right?
Mhm.
Which is a good place to start if you want to start doing
yeah,
some
yeah,
open source stuff. I don't even really think of it as open source. I kind of that wasn't like my motivating factor. But they are all technically open source if you want to go look up at them. Um,
yeah.
and I guess from a stack perspective, for anybody curious, this is 11D, which is another thing you'll find me talking about a lot. 11D, and then just Parcel to help with the JS coming
Okay.
together. If just quick motion warning, I forgot to give it before I loaded this, but I'm going to scroll through here and this little cloud just
Mhm.
pops up. So just a little
Okay.
motion warning here. Um, but the goal of Button Buddy is to kind of explain what accessible contrast means. So just very quick overview of those things, but more specifically to in regards to buttons. So for buttons versus just our text links,
Mm-hmm.
there's like two more dimensions to think about. So we have to not only think about, and folks usually miss one of the dimensions. So folks, normally understand, okay, my text contrast of the actual like button text has to work with the button background, but they miss the fact that because it's a user interface component, if you are, particularly if you're relying on color alone to change focus or even on hover and things, you still have to maintain then at least a 3-to-1 contrast difference between the button background and whatever surface it's on. So the other
Mm-hmm.
key part of that, once again, coming from my marketing background, is I know this button's going to live on lots of different colored backgrounds. And I know that
Yeah,
at some point it's going to live over an image, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
um, at least trying to stabilize a 3-to-1 over most common backgrounds, or, that's another reason it's in the design systems, you usually see some variance provided is,
Okay.
part of that is to convey hierarchy, but it also can alleviate some contrast. That's kind of a tangent. But anyway, so this kind of explains what those different ones are. But the
Mhm.
key, a little bit more background, talking about the upcoming web content accessibility guidelines. They're going to be making the focus related style criteria a little bit different too, a little bit stronger in favor of making sure you're meeting that 3-to-1 and so forth for buttons. Um, but anyway, so I'm actually the main point of Button Buddy is to first educate you, but then also give you this tool so that you can experiment. And so right now, of course, it's giving you a button that passes all these things. We have
Mhm.
Yeah.
5 different criteria that this needs to meet. So surface versus background, background versus text, surface. I'm referring to the whatever's behind the button as a surface.
Okay.
Surface
Okay.
versus focus background. So when I focus it, if you're relying on color alone, but also focus background versus then the text color, right? Because you've
Mm-hmm.
changed your context. And then the button background versus or the background versus the button focus background. Anyway, it's a whole deal.
Yeah.
And that's, like, hard to
Yeah.
even, like,
Mhm.
think through, so this, lets you kinda play with that, and again, a motion warning, I'm gonna update the background, and what Nick
Mhm.
was talking about is if you have poor contrast, but he gets sad,
No.
and then as you improve your contrast, he gets happier, so but you can also see that as these change, like, now I'm in a passing state for my initial, but if I'm, again, relying on focus or background color alone, now I've started to fail the
Mhm.
initial button background versus focus because that has to be a three to
Yeah.
one change.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just kind of it helps you learn all that. I had previously in Modern CSS done a guide to just generally button styling, so you can learn about that. But yeah, so this is definitely one of my more interactive projects. I'm usually not. This is all vanilla CSS or
Mhm.
vanilla JavaScript. I'm usually not doing something as interactive as this one, but
Okay.
yeah, it was fun to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a super helpful project too. I mean, it's super fun to play around with, but it has real world applications, obviously. Like,
Yeah.
uh, I think this is something that's super approachable for somebody like, new. If you're just like, well, you have to be worried about, yeah, not worried. You have to be concerned about color contrast. Just head over here and, just toggle things around and have fun. And because, like on the WebAIM color contrast, or like the thing I've noticed too is like, I mean, unless the contrast is really, really off, a lot of times it's like just slight tweak to like,
Hmm.
sometimes I don't
Mhm.
even really like visually, I don't notice the color change that much. And it's
Yeah.
just that little, just move it over a little bit. And so, yeah,
Yep.
no, this is super valuable. Um, you were talking about another project, Christina, you wanted to talk about?
Oh yeah,
So
this is just a
style
fun one
stage.
that she
Oh
she
yeah, yeah,
has
style
style
stage.
stage.
Yeah,
So if you want to
Yeah.
hark back to the old days of,
yeah.
having fun with CSS here, style stage you can do, which is more modern.
My spiel on style stage. Um, this was like my first, besides modern CSS, besides just writing, this was my first project I kind of pushed out there. Um, about a year and a half ago, July 2020. Um, and for those who are a little bit older on the web, yep, Nick just put the link in. But there was an older project from 2003 to 2013 about called CSS Garden by Dave Shea, and this is kind of a reincarnation of it. He's blessed it, by the way, for anyone concerned. But of folks can contribute a style sheet and everybody gets the same HTML. So actually what I am
Mhm.
showing you right now on the homepage, that's the HTML that you're restyling. So kind of promoted it a little bit extra during Hacktober and
Yeah.
did get some extra submissions during that time. But I think we're over, let's see, one, two, three,
Oh,
four.
it's a lot more than the
Oh
last time
wow,
I
there's a lot
checked
more
in.
than last time I checked. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whatever, 14 times 5, so 73.
Wow.
So
That's
I should put a little
impressive.
counter so that's easier to find. But yeah, 73 in here, which is awesome. It's been really fun. You can already kind of tell by the thumbnails
Mhm.
here that, just all sorts of skill levels. This is for everybody. It is not a beauty contest. It is just another way to learn and practice. What made it important to me, why I wanted to provide it as a resource is, I mean, I love Codepen. Obviously, I whipped it out twice today. But
Yeah, yeah.
and that's really super great for really focused explorations. But we
Mhm.
were missing a opportunity outside of courses, outside of tutorials, outside of design programs or whatever, and outside of your own personal portfolio to do to practice whole page web design.
Yeah.
And again, it's not
Mhm.
a beauty contest, so it's not super about the design, but it's about practicing, uh, modern CSS, of course, would be the other motivation. Um, but modern CSS, whole page web design, and just, being able to experiment with open source too. I didn't really think of that when I initially launched it, but for a lot of folks, it's been the first time they've gotten on GitHub and completed a
Mhm.
pull request. And so even just to
Yeah.
get a little bit of familiarity with that. So what happens is if you contribute, I review it. There are some guidelines. I also wanted to make sure that the guidelines included accessibility considerations.
Yeah.
So you don't have to read the HTML, but accessibility of color contrast and motion would be another big one. Um, so just kind of learning these different things that, again, you may not encounter in other course materials or in your daily work, have the
Mhm.
opportunity to do them. Um, I definitely know, as in marketing, I was literally making, going from design of whole entire pages to full websites, but I know that's not really the case in most positions, especially if you're coming into a
Yeah.
legacy product. So yeah,
Yeah.
just that other avenue to play around and have fun, learn through play. So
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's what I really like about all the things you put out there. There's always a fun aspect to it, because you know what I mean? Because learning material, this is learning material, even though you're doing something, you're contributing to it. But it's when things are fun, it's just adds, because some of the stuff could be really dry. And so like I just like the spin you put on all these things. So it's
thanks.
just awesome stuff. I am fanboying a bit. Sorry, I do love everything that Stephanie does. So I'm a cheerleader for her. So. Um,
I appreciate it.
cool, cool. I'll stop being awkward.
You're all right,
Um,
Stephanie.
um, Yeah, we're pretty much getting close to time here. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to mention before we kind of wrap things up here, Steph. Definitely, like we always tell our guests, shamelessly plug anything you want to. I know we've definitely plugged a bunch of the stuff you've been doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So this is kind
I'll
I
of
just
be
like
pulled
on
up
the
my
where
stream
everything
portfolio. This is
is.
tomorrow. If you want to catch
yeah.
her
Oh
on the
yeah, that's
stream
right.
again.
Yes.
It never ends. Yeah.
Yes. Joining Front End Horse
Not our
tomorrow.
stream. Yeah, front end horse.
Yep.
Awesome stream. Everyone should check it
Yeah,
out
yeah,
if you're on.
Yeah,
yeah.
I
I'll
just
find
popped
the
this in.
link.
This
Yeah.
is gonna be, I mean, outside of GitHub, this kind of rounds up all my projects and resources. And I have a
Awesome.
Okay.
newsletter if that's something you're into. You can sign up there. But yeah, so and a few of my kind of favorite posts from around and different events, which forgot to update this for today and tomorrow. But anyway,
It's all good.
yeah, I'm behind
I
in
saw it,
updating
it
the
came out
event
in the
section.
newsletter, so
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So
cool,
yeah,
cool.
but thanks so much for
Awesome.
inviting me on.
Yes, we loved
Yeah.
having you.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. Yeah, just wanted to say thanks again. And yeah, like Steph said, check out Tross Code's stream tomorrow. I'm not sure what time that's at, but
I know it's 11 Central for me, 12 Eastern, if that
There you
makes
go.
okay, so that's
sense.
4 p.m. UTC for whatever time zone you're in. Cool, cool, cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody who popped by, and we will see you all next week. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.